Hello everyone, if you love touching animal stories and want to follow the inspiring journey of these adorable friends, don't forget to hit the subscribe button now so you won't miss any of our videos. Now, let's dive into today's emotional story. The autumn air in Maple Creek carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves and damp earth. The sun had begun its descent, casting long golden streaks through the trees while the town settled into its quiet evening routine. Neighbors greeted one another on their porches, children's laughter echoed from backyards, and the smell of warm bread drifted from the town's small bakery. At the far edge of town, 12-year-old Ethan Carter leaned against the old wooden fence of his grandmother's farmhouse, staring out at the overgrown fields. The distant hoot of an owl signaled the coming of dusk, but his attention was elsewhere. He had heard something, a faint, broken sound, somewhere between a whimper and a low growl. Ethan hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. Was it an injured animal, or something more dangerous? Swallowing his fear, he stepped forward, his bare feet brushing against the cool grass. His pulse quickened as he approached the old barn, its rusted doors hanging loose on their hinges. The structure had once housed his grandfather's tools, but it had fallen into disrepair since his passing. Then he saw it. Huddled in the shadows was a German shepherd, its fur tangled with mud and dried blood. Ribs protruded from its sides, and one of its front legs bore a deep gash. The dog's amber eyes locked onto Ethan's, filled with something he couldn't quite name. Not just pain, not just fear, it was pleading. Ethan swallowed hard, his instincts warring with caution. The town had been buzzing with warnings about a stray dog lurking at the outskirts. Some said it had attacked livestock. Others whispered it had chased a delivery truck and nearly caused an accident. People wanted it gone. But looking at the dog now, all Ethan saw was a creature on the edge of survival. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, crouching low, his hands open in a gesture of peace. The dog flinched but didn't growl, its body tensed as if ready to bolt, but exhaustion seemed to keep it in place. Slowly, carefully, Ethan extended his fingers. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, hesitantly, the German shepherd lowered its head and sniffed his hand. A shiver ran down Ethan's spine, not from fear, but from something else. Something deeper. He could feel it, the unspoken connection between them. The way the dog wanted to trust him, but had been hurt too many times before. Ethan took a steady breath. "It's okay, I won't hurt you." The dog let out a slow, ragged breath and, against all odds, leaned into his touch. For the first time, in what felt like forever, the shepherd let someone in. That was the night everything changed. The next morning, Ethan woke before the sun had fully risen. He lay in bed for a moment, replaying the events of the previous night in his mind. The German shepherd, injured and starving, had trusted him, if only for a brief moment. But what now? He threw off his blanket and rushed downstairs, his heart pounding. His grandmother, Margaret Carter, was already in the kitchen, humming softly as she poured a cup of coffee. Her gray hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and her face, lined with years of wisdom, softened as she saw him. "You're up early," she noted, taking a sip. "Something on your mind?" Ethan hesitated. He had always been close to his grandmother, but she was a practical woman, not one for taking in strays. She had enough on her plate maintaining the old farmhouse. If she found out about the dog, she might insist on calling animal control, or worse, sending it away for good. "Just couldn't sleep," he mumbled. Margaret gave him a knowing look but didn't press further. Ethan quickly grabbed a few slices of leftover chicken from the fridge, stuffing them into a napkin before heading outside. The early morning air was crisp, and the ground was still damp with dew. The barn stood silent, bathed in the soft light of dawn. Ethan approached cautiously, his breath visible in the cool air. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, pushing open the creaky door. The German shepherd was still there, curled in the same spot, though its ears perked up at the sound of Ethan's voice. The fear in its amber eyes had faded slightly, replaced with something else. Curiosity. "I brought you some food," Ethan said, kneeling and gently tossing a piece of chicken toward the dog. The shepherd sniffed the offering, hesitated, then devoured it in seconds. Ethan smiled, tossing another, then another. As the dog ate, Ethan took a better look at its injuries. The gash on its front leg was deep, though the bleeding had stopped. Its ribs were painfully visible beneath the thick, matted fur. How long had it been out here alone? He needed to clean the wound, but how? He couldn't risk startling the dog. It still didn't fully trust him. Then an idea struck him. "I'll be right back," he whispered before rushing back inside. Margaret was at the sink, washing dishes. Ethan took a deep breath. "Grandma, do we still have that old first aid kit?" Margaret turned, eyebrow raised. "You hurt yourself." "No," Ethan said quickly, too quickly. "Just wanted to be prepared." She studied him for a long moment before nodding toward the cabinet. "It should be under the sink." Ethan grabbed the kit and hurried back to the barn. When he returned, the dog was watching him closely, as if sensing what was about to happen. "Okay, buddy," Ethan murmured. "This might sting a little." He opened the antiseptic wipes and carefully inched closer. The dog tensed but didn't move. Slowly, Ethan dabbed at the wound, whispering soothing words as he worked. To his amazement, the shepherd didn't snap or growl. It let him clean the wound, flinching only slightly. When he was done, Ethan sat back with a relieved sigh. "There, that's better, right?" The shepherd lifted its head slightly, gazing at him with something Ethan hadn't expected: gratitude. For the first time, the dog's tail gave a small, tentative wag. Ethan's chest swelled with something warm and unspoken. He wasn't just helping the dog was helping him, too. Over the next few days, the German shepherd slowly grew stronger under Ethan's care. Every morning before school, he would sneak out to the barn with food and fresh water. In the evenings, he would sit by the dog's side, speaking softly while the animal watched him with quiet, intelligent eyes. Ethan had started calling him Ranger, a name that felt right. He didn't know why, but it suited the dog's strong, watchful nature. One evening, as Ethan was petting Ranger's head, the barn door creaked open behind him. He froze. What in the world? It was Margaret. Ethan turned slowly, his heart pounding. His grandmother stood in the doorway, arms crossed, staring at the large shepherd lying beside him. "You've been sneaking out here to take care of him, haven't you?" she asked. Ethan swallowed hard, nodding. There was no point in lying now. Margaret sighed and stepped closer. Ranger lifted his head but didn't growl. Ethan quickly placed a hand on the dog's back. "He's not dangerous, Grandma. He was hurt, and I couldn't just leave him out here." Margaret knelt slowly, her sharp eyes assessing the dog. "He looks better than when I first saw him in town. Folks have been talking about this stray, you know." Ethan stiffened. "Are they saying bad things?" Margaret hesitated before answering. "Some people think he's a menace. They say he's been growling at strangers, but I see something different." She extended a hand, palm down, allowing Ranger to sniff. The shepherd eyed her warily before nudging her fingers with his nose. Margaret chuckled softly. "Well, that's something." Ethan exhaled in relief. "Can we keep him?" His grandmother's eyes softened, but she didn't answer immediately. "We don't even know where he came from, Ethan. He might belong to someone." Ethan's chest tightened. But what if he doesn't? What if he's been abandoned? Margaret studied the dog a moment longer. "All right," she finally said. "We'll give him some time. But we have to do this the right way. I'll call around, see if anyone is missing a shepherd. In the meantime, we'll move him inside." Ethan grinned. "Really?" Margaret gave him a knowing smile. "Yes, really. But you're responsible for him. That means feeding, walking, and making sure he behaves." Ethan turned to Ranger. "Hear that, buddy? You're coming home." For the first time, Ranger wagged his tail fully, not just a hesitant flick, but a true happy wag. That night, Ethan made a makeshift bed for Ranger in the mudroom. The shepherd paced nervously at first, unfamiliar with the space, but after a few reassuring pats from Ethan, he curled up on the blankets. As Ethan sat beside him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this dog had been through something much bigger than just being a stray. The way Ranger watched the door, the way he seemed to always be on alert. This wasn't a normal lost dog. Something had happened to him, and Ethan was determined to find out the truth. As the days passed, Ranger settled into life with Ethan and Margaret. He was no longer the fearful, wounded stray they had found. He was alert, responsive, and fiercely loyal. Ethan spent every free moment with him, training him with basic commands, though it quickly became clear that Ranger already knew them. "He's more than just a lost dog," Ethan told Margaret one evening. "Look how he moves. He's trained, but not like a pet. It's like he was meant to do something important." Margaret nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing, Ethan." Her search for Ranger's owner had turned up nothing. No missing dog reports, no claims from nearby shelters or police stations. It was as if he had appeared out of nowhere. But then, everything changed. It was late afternoon when Ethan heard the screams. "Help! Somebody! Please!" The sound came from the creek behind their property. Ethan didn't think. He ran. Margaret called after him, but he was already sprinting down the trail toward the water. His heart pounded as he saw what had happened. A little girl, no older than 6, was trapped in the rushing current, her small hands gripping a fallen tree branch for dear life. Her mother stood on the bank, sobbing, panicking, unable to reach her daughter. Ethan froze for only a second. Then, before he could move, Ranger charged past him. The shepherd leaped into the water, paddling powerfully against the current. The little girl screamed, slipping further down. Ethan could only watch in awe as Ranger reached her, positioning himself just beneath her body. The dog lifted her from underneath, his strong frame keeping her afloat as he paddled toward the shore. The girl coughed, water spilling from her mouth. She grabbed onto Ranger's back, clinging to his thick fur. With sheer determination, the shepherd fought the current, dragging her toward the safety of the bank. Margaret had arrived, along with a few neighbors, just in time to see Ranger pull the girl to safety. The mother collapsed in relief, grabbing her child and sobbing into her shoulder. Ethan ran forward, falling to his knees beside Ranger. The dog was panting hard, soaked and exhausted, but he was alive. "You did it, boy," Ethan whispered, running his hands through the shepherd's wet fur. Margaret crouched beside them, pressing a trembling hand to Ranger's head. That was no ordinary rescue. He knew exactly what to do. News of the heroic dog spread fast. The town, once wary of Ranger, now saw him as a hero. The girl's family wanted to thank Margaret and Ethan personally, and even the sheriff came to visit. But it was a stranger who delivered the biggest revelation. A man in uniform arrived at their house 2 days later. "Mrs. Hayes," he asked Margaret, "I'm Officer Reynolds. I believe you might have found our missing search and rescue dog." Ethan stared in shock. Margaret invited the officer inside, where Ranger sat calmly, his amber eyes watching the newcomer. Reynolds knelt, reaching out his hand. "Ranger?" At the sound of his old name, the dog perked up slightly. The officer exhaled in relief. "That's him. I'd know him anywhere. His real name is Max, and he was part of our search and rescue unit. He went missing nearly a year ago during a flood operation." Ethan's chest tightened. "Missing? What happened to him?" Reynolds sighed. "His handler, Officer Grayson, was injured in the flood. Max got separated. We searched for him for weeks, but eventually, we had to assume the worst." Margaret placed a hand over her heart. "So he was never abandoned. He was just lost." The officer nodded. "And now he's saved another life. That's who he is, a hero." Ethan swallowed hard, realization hitting him like a wave. Ranger, Max, had found his way to them for a reason. He had saved them, just as much as they had saved him. Margaret looked between the officer and the dog, her expression gentle but firm. "Well," she said, scratching behind Ranger's ears, "the way I see it, Max already has a home. Unless, of course, he'd rather go back." Reynolds hesitated. "It's up to him," he admitted, "but search dogs usually form deep bonds with their handlers. If he's chosen Ethan, I won't take that away from him." Ethan held his breath, looking at Ranger. The shepherd stared up at him, then slowly, deliberately, pressed his head into Ethan's chest. The decision was made. Ethan grinned, tears stinging his eyes. "Looks like he's staying," Margaret chuckled. "Good, because I don't think we could let him go anyway." And from that day forward, Ranger was no longer just a stray. He was family. The message of the story of Ranger, is more than just a tale of survival. It's a testament to the power of second chances, trust, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Once lost and abandoned, Ranger found himself in the care of Ethan and Margaret, who saw beyond his scars and fears. In return, Ranger not only protected their home, but also saved a child's life, proving that heroes can come in many forms. His journey reminds us that every being deserves love and a chance to heal. Sometimes, the ones we rescue end up rescuing us in ways we never expect. The town once feared Ranger, but through patience and understanding, they recognized his true nature, a protector, a savior, and a loyal friend. This story also teaches us about forgiveness and trust. Ranger could have given up on people, yet he chose to trust again. Similarly, Ethan and Margaret opened their hearts, despite the uncertainties. In the end, love and kindness prevail over fear and doubt. Ranger wasn't just a dog. He was a symbol of resilience, loyalty, and the incredible impact that compassion can have on the world around us.